I moved into Willowbrook Estates 3 years ago, drawn by the tree-lined streets and well-maintained homes. The HOA seemed reasonable enough at first, just basic rules about lawn care and exterior paint colors. I worked remotely as a corporate attorney specializing in property law, which gave me flexibility and, admittedly, a comfortable financial cushion from years of successful cases. My house was modest by my standards, but I appreciated the quiet suburban charm. Then Karen Mitchell moved in 2 doors down. Within a month, she'd maneuvered herself onto the HOA board. Within 2 months, she was president. I learned this at a mandatory meeting where she introduced herself with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and announced her vision for making Willowbrook truly exceptional. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning. I was enjoying coffee on my front porch when Karen marched up my walkway, clipboard in hand. "Good morning. I am conducting a neighborhood assessment, and I have noticed several concerning issues with your property. Before you hit that subscribe button, let me tell you how this encounter would change everything. If you enjoy stories about HOA karma and epic revenge, you are going to love where this goes. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to Karen Eat World because this tale of suburban warfare is just getting started." I set down my coffee. "What issues would those be?" "Your mailbox is black. The approved color is colonial bronze. Also, your lawn was mowed in a horizontal pattern. The HOA guidelines specify vertical mowing only." I blinked. I have read the guidelines. There is no mention of mowing patterns. She flipped through her clipboard. "It is in the new addendum I am proposing. I am giving you advance notice as a courtesy. The vote is next week." An addendum about mowing patterns? Horizontal mowing creates an unkempt appearance. Also, I have noticed you park your car in the driveway overnight. Vehicles should be garaged to maintain neighborhood aesthetics. My garage is full of storage. Then you need to reorganize it. This is about community standards." She smiled that cold smile again. "I am sure you understand." Over the next month, Karen's community standards became increasingly specific. The addendum passed because most homeowners didn't attend the meeting. Suddenly, we had rules about the direction of mowing patterns, the specific shade of mailbox bronze, and a prohibition on driveway parking between sunset and sunrise. Then came the violation notices. I received my first for having a wreath on my door in March. Decorative door ornaments are only permitted during designated holiday periods. The fine was $50. I paid it and removed the wreath. My neighbor, the Johnsons, received a notice about their garden gnome. The Patel family got cited for having their porch light on past 10 p.m. Karen was systematically writing citations, and the fines were piling up. I decided to attend the next board meeting. Perhaps a reasonable conversation could resolve this. The meeting was held in Karen's living room, which should have been my first clue. She sat at the head of her dining table, flanked by 2 other board members who looked distinctly uncomfortable. "I would like to discuss the recent increase in violation notices," I began calmly. "I am simply enforcing the rules. Many of these rules are new and seem arbitrarily restrictive." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Are you questioning my leadership?" "I am questioning whether these rules serve the community's best interests. The best interest of this community is maintaining property values through strict standards. If you cannot comply, perhaps you should consider whether Willowbrook is the right fit for you." The other board members shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. That is when I realized Karen had effectively bullied them into silence. The following week, I received 3 violation notices in one day. My recycling bin was visible from the street on a non-collection day. My house numbers were 1/4 inch too small per a new interpretation of the guidelines. And apparently, the shade of white on my window trim was ecru, when it should be frost white. Each violation carried a $50 fine. I called Karen to discuss this. "These seem excessive. Rules are rules. You know, I have been reviewing property records. You are a lawyer, correct? I would think someone with your education would appreciate the importance of following established guidelines." There was something in her tone, a sharpness that made me pay attention. "What are you really concerned about, Karen?" "I am concerned about maintaining standards. Speaking of which, I noticed you had a visitor last weekend who stayed quite late. We are considering a new rule about guest parking. My friend Maria had visited on Saturday. We'd had dinner and watched movies. Are you monitoring my guests?" "I am observing the neighborhood. That is my job as president." She paused. "You know, Willowbrook has always been a very traditional family community. We want to keep it that way." And there it was. The real issue. Maria and I were close friends, and to someone like Karen, two women having dinner might suggest something that threatened her narrow worldview. "I see," I said quietly. "I am glad we understand each other. The next board meeting is in 2 weeks. I will be proposing additional guidelines about overnight guests and vehicle registrations. We need to ensure everyone living in or frequently visiting Willowbrook aligns with our community values." She hung up before I could respond. I sat in my home office, staring at the phone. I had dealt with difficult opposing counsel, unreasonable judges, and complex property disputes. But this was different. This was someone trying to use petty regulations to push out anyone she deemed undesirable. Over the next few days, I did what I do best. Research. I pulled every document related to Willowbrook Estates. The original development plans from 1998. The HOA incorporation papers. The master deed. The covenant restrictions. Every amendment, every board meeting minute for the past 27 years. I discovered something interesting. The original developer had retained ownership of 3 empty lots within Willowbrook, planning a second phase that never materialized. Those lots had been sold to a holding company in 2005. That holding company was now defunct, and the lots had escheated to the county for unpaid taxes. Even more interesting, those 3 lots surrounded the small private park at the center of our neighborhood, the one amenity that made Willowbrook special. The park had walking trails, a gazebo, and a small pond. It was accessible only through an easement across one of those defunct lots. I made some calls. By the end of the week, I had purchased all 3 lots from the county for back taxes. Total cost, $12,000. But I wasn't done researching. I examined the HOA bylaws more carefully. Karen's recent amendments had been pushed through with minimal attendance, but the original bylaws required a 2/3 vote of all homeowners, not just those present, for any amendment affecting property access or use rights. Every single one of Karen's new rules was technically invalid. I could have simply challenged the rules. But then I read the complaints Karen had been filing. She'd sent letters to the county about suspicious vehicles, to the police about disturbing activities, and to the state HOA regulatory board about residents who may not meet community standards. In one letter, she specifically mentioned concerns about lifestyle choices incompatible with family values, and suggested the HOA should have more control over approving long-term guests and determining household compositions. She wasn't just being petty. She was trying to build a paper trail to justify discrimination. I scheduled a meeting with my old law firm. 3 of my former partners specialized in civil rights law, property development, and municipal regulations. I explained the situation. "So you want to," Marcus, the property specialist, paused. "You want to do what exactly?" "I want to make it impossible for her to continue this harassment, using completely legal means, in a way that specifically addresses her attempt to control who can live in this neighborhood." Sarah, the civil rights attorney, leaned forward. "Tell me more about these lots you purchased." I explained the layout. The 3 lots formed a U-shape around the neighborhood park. The only access was through an easement on Lot A, which I now owned. "And the HOA documents?" Marcus asked. "The original covenant grants all residents access to the common areas, but the access easement itself was a separate agreement with the original developer. It was never properly transferred to the HOA. It just sort of continued by custom." Marcus grinned. So technically, you own the only legal access to the park. Technically, yes. But that is not the main play. I laid out my full plan. It took 2 hours. When I finished, Sarah was smiling. This is brilliant. Completely legal, utterly devastating, and it specifically turns her exclusionary tactics into her own prison. Can we pull it off? Marcus nodded. Give me 3 weeks. The next HOA meeting arrived. Karen had prepared a new set of proposed amendments. I'd seen the agenda. She wanted to require board approval for any household member or frequent guest, with specific criteria about family structure and traditional values. She was about to make her discriminatory intent undeniably clear in an official document. I attended with my attorney, Sarah, which immediately put Karen on edge. This is a closed meeting for residents only. I am a resident. Sarah is here as my legal observer. Unless you would like to add legal representation restrictions to your growing list of rules? Karen's jaw tightened, but she proceeded. She presented her proposals with the same cold smile. We simply want to ensure that Willowbrook maintains its character as a traditional family neighborhood. One brave homeowner raised a hand. What exactly do you mean by traditional family? I think we all know what that means. We want to preserve the wholesome, conventional atmosphere that makes Willowbrook special. Sarah was taking notes. Perfect. Before we vote, I said, standing. I need to address some procedural issues. First, the last 6 amendments passed by this board were done so without the required 2/3 majority of all homeowners as specified in the original bylaws. They are all invalid. Karen's face reddened. We followed proper procedure. No, you followed the procedure from a 1999 amendment that itself was improperly ratified. I have the documentation here. I distributed copies. The room erupted in whispers. Furthermore, I continued, the HOA has been operating under bylaws that were never properly filed with the county. I have taken the liberty of correcting this oversight and filing the original, valid bylaws, which are substantially different from what President Mitchell has been enforcing. Karen stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. You cannot just. I absolutely can. It is all public record. But that is not why I am here tonight. I nodded to Sarah, who stood. My name is Sarah Chen, and I am a civil rights attorney. I have been reviewing the correspondence and complaints filed by your HOA president. Mrs. Mitchell, you have created a documented pattern of attempting to use HOA rules to exclude residents based on protected characteristics. Your own words and letters to county officials make your intent clear. Karen's face went pale. I never. You explicitly mentioned lifestyle choices and family structures. You attempted to create rules requiring board approval for household members. This is textbook housing discrimination. The room was completely silent. Now, I said, taking over. Here's what is going to happen. First, all invalid amendments are void. Second, Mrs. Mitchell, you are going to resign as HOA president effective immediately. Third, the board is going to adopt a clear non-discrimination policy that I have already drafted in compliance with state and federal fair housing laws. And if I refuse? Karen's voice shook with rage. Then Sarah files a fair housing complaint with the state and a civil suit on behalf of multiple residents. Given your documented statements, you would likely lose. The HOA would face substantial fines. Your homeowner's insurance would not cover you personally for intentional discrimination, so you would be personally liable for damages. I paused. But there is more. I pulled out another document. I own 3 lots in this subdivision, including the lot that contains the only legal access easement to the neighborhood park. Understanding began dawning on Karen's face. The access easement was never properly transferred to the HOA. It remained with the property. Which means I control who can access the park. You cannot. I can. But I am not going to be unreasonable about it. I am going to grant a new easement to the HOA. A very specific easement. I distributed copies of the proposed easement. This easement grants access to all residents and their guests, regardless of household composition, family structure, or any other characteristic protected under fair housing law. It explicitly prohibits the HOA from restricting access based on any discriminatory criteria. And here is the key part: if the HOA or any of its officers are found to have engaged in housing discrimination, the easement automatically revokes. Marcus, joining via speakerphone, added, "The park is the main amenity of this neighborhood. It is why property values are high here. Without access, those values would drop considerably." By Mrs. Mitchell's own logic about maintaining property values, discriminatory behavior now directly threatens every homeowner's investment. Karen was staring at the document, her hands trembling. "But wait, there is more," I said. "I am also developing the other 2 lots I purchased. Lot B will have a small community center, which I am donating to the HOA, with the same conditional use restrictions. Lot C, I am keeping." I pulled out architectural plans. Lot C will have a single-family home. My primary residence, which I will be moving into next month. And I will be placing a permanent conservation easement on the surrounding land, creating a buffer that happens to make your property, Karen, landlocked except for the road access. Her eyes widened. "Moreover, since your property will now back directly onto a conservation easement, you will be subject to additional environmental restrictions. No pesticides within 50 feet of the boundary. No artificial lighting that spills onto the easement. No noise above specified levels during nesting season. These are all standard conservation easement terms, approved by the County Environmental Board last week." Marcus continued via phone, "Essentially, Mrs. Mitchell, you tried to use rules to control your neighbors. Now you will have more rules restricting your property than anyone else in Willowbrook. All completely legal, all properly filed, all permanent." Finally, Sarah added, "We will be monitoring this HOA closely. Any future discrimination complaints, and I will pursue them aggressively. Your attempt to create an exclusionary neighborhood has instead created one with the strongest fair housing protections in the county." Karen's mouth opened and closed. The other homeowners were reading the documents, and I could see understanding spreading through the room. "You cannot do this," Karen whispered. "I just did," I replied calmly. "You tried to use regulations and rules to push out anyone you deemed unacceptable. You specifically targeted me because you made assumptions about my life that threatened your narrow worldview. So I used regulations and rules right back. The difference is, mine are actually legal." I gathered my documents. "Oh, and Karen? That wreath violation you cited me for? Decorative door ornaments are actually protected under the original bylaws as personal expression. You owe me $50. I will expect a check." The room was absolutely silent as I walked toward the door. Then, Mrs. Patel started clapping. Then Mr. Johnson. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding except for Karen, who stood frozen behind her dining table, her clipboard hanging limply from one hand. She finally understood. Her attempt to control the neighborhood through petty rules had resulted in her own property being subjected to restrictions she could never escape. Her effort to discriminate had created permanent legal protections against discrimination. Her try at forcing me out had resulted in me literally surrounding the neighborhood's most valuable asset with conditions that ensured inclusivity forever. She had wanted to decide who belonged in Willowbrook. Now she had no power at all, while I held the actual leverage. And every single thing I had done was completely, unquestionably legal. The look on her face as the full scope of her defeat crystallized was something I would never forget. Pure, absolute shock mixed with the dawning realization that she had been outmaneuvered at every single level, using nothing but the system she had tried to weaponize. If you enjoyed watching Karen get exactly what she deserved, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to Karen Eat World for more stories of epic revenge and karmic justice. Trust me, you do not want to miss what is coming next.